Howdy, folks. My name is David Cobb. I have the honor of serving on the Green Eco-Socialist Network's steering committee. The Green Eco-Socialist Network is an ad hoc, informal grouping. All of us currently are Green Party members, but most importantly, we self-identify as explicit, unapologetic revolutionaries. And specifically, that means that we believe a couple of things. One, that revolution is a process, not an event. It also means that we are committed to restructuring the entirety of society. We do not believe that one can simply make some reforms to the existing systems, but we need a new political, social, and economic system for how the world is organized. We also are clear that although this is not a Green Party arm, one of the things that we're trying to do is to help build the Green Party into a functional, revolutionary, eco-socialist political party that is serious about taking and exercising state power and using it to help facilitate both the end of capitalism and the creation of an eco-socialist society. I also want to be explicit and clear that we are not exclusive to Green Party folks. We welcome anyone who is interested in the task of restructuring society. And we're trying to win people over to a philosophy of eco-socialism, and frankly, grapple with people. We invite you to challenge us if you like, but we're being clear. We have an explicit, unambiguous understanding that it is in fact going to take a revolutionary process. We do not believe that you can merely vote your way into the world that we want, although all of us believe that voting is a tactical consideration that one can engage in strategically, but not exclusively. So again, it is my great pleasure to say that we're going to actually be hearing from 3 local examples of eco-socialism in action. Mel Figueroa is going to start with a explanation and an introduction, if you will, to Chico TEK, or TEK Chico, stands for Traditional Ecological Knowledge in Chico, California. Then we'll go to Michelle Eddleman McCormick, who is active with Cooperation Vermont, and we'll give her about 10 minutes to give an overview. Then we'll go to Kamal Franklin of Community Movement Builders in Atlanta. And I hope you can see already we've got broad geographical differences, right? But we've also got very unique cultural differences in each of these places. So, and this, as the facilitator, one of the things that I'm tasked with is to really underscore that we do not believe that there is a one-size-fit-all approach to creating, cultivating, and building an eco-socialist framework in order to be revolutionaries. We are clear in our convictions and our principles and our values, but we are quite open and ecumenical, in fact, about how this actually can and will look in different places. Because although humans make revolution, they do not make revolution according to their own desires. We make revolution according to the objective material conditions in which we find ourselves. And frankly, folks, let's just be really honest. The objective material conditions of the global situation is dire. We have an ecological collapse. It's not coming, it's here and getting worse. On top of that, we have an economic system known as capitalism that is in its late stages and is literally turning on itself. It is commodifying Mother Earth faster than she can replenish herself. But deeper still, or in addition to that, even if there was some technological fix, right? And the problem of sustainability was somehow solved with a technological fix, which, by the way, none of us on this call, at least presenters or in the Green Eco-Socialist Network, believe is possible. But even if that magical thinking were to come to fruition, it is our position that because of how capitalism works, by extracting the surplus value of the labor of the worker, that we are in end-stage capitalism because with automation, robotics, technology, there is not the need for the worker anymore. And so, although we should and could be living in paradise, because of how capitalism works and the ownership model of capitalism itself, it's morphing into the third crisis, which is the political crisis, which bluntly is fascism. Fascism is rising not just in this country, but across the world. Across the world, the characteristics look basically the same, which is an ethno-national, nation state with hyper-masculinity, hyper-militarism, a creation of an us versus them. In this country, it is absolutely white supremacist, but there are fascists who are brown and black-skinned happening all across the country because, again, we are seeing the objective material conditions begin. The last thing I'm going to do in my 10-minute overview before I turn it over to Mel, again, is to describe what we mean by eco-socialism. So I want to be clear. By eco-socialism, we in the Green Eco-Socialist Network are referring to a new economic and social system that is based on a commitment to the social ownership of the instruments of the production and distribution of the means of production. That's social ownership, not necessarily state ownership. Secondly, that production itself is geared towards human needs, not for profit. And that's a profound distinction between capitalism. You know, for those of you who may know the terminology, it's the difference between creating commodity value versus use value versus surplus value. The third commitment that we have, as we describe eco-socialism, is that production decisions should be made democratically by the workers and the producers and the affected communities themselves without mediation. Or at least the mediation is done as directly as possible, but it's workers and impacted communities, affected communities, users who are making the decision. So another way to think about that is a genuinely decentralized planning from below. Planning to be sure, but not the typical national hierarchical power over kind of planning, and definitely not let the market decide, because that means if you don't have money, you starve, or you don't have a place to live, or you don't have the human needs met. The next commitment that we make as we understand eco-socialism is opposition to and a commitment to dismantle both patriarchy, white supremacy, imperialism in all its forms, both extractive and settler colonial, et cetera, and any power over dominator extractive system, and a move towards power with democratic systems of love and compassion. And then lastly, decision-making process has to be led by, has got to be understood through the lens of a natural ecosystem, whether you call that regenerative, decolonized. There's any number of ways one can talk about it, but what we want to be clear and crystal clear is our commitment that in a eco-socialist worldview, there is a recognition that human beings are not at the center, that we are part of the ecosystem, that we have a role to play as stewards and partners, but we do not put ourselves above all species or above all life, but instead try to understand ourselves as part of an ecosystem. So that was my effort to frame today, to frame who we are at the Green Eco-Socialist Network, to tell you what we mean by eco-socialism. At the end of this, we will invite you. We are a dues-paying organization. Again, this is completely free, but we would love to have you join us, but we'll do that at the end. And now, within my 10 minutes, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce my dear friend, my comrade, my mentor, Mel Figueroa, who's going to talk to us about TEK Chico. Mel Figueroa, the microphone is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm really excited to talk about what we're doing where I sit in occupied Mechoopda territory, otherwise known as Chico, California. Chico and the area around Chico became famous in 2018 as as Paradise, the town right up the hill from us was destroyed in the Camp Fire, the largest, deadliest, I mean, not the largest, but the deadliest and most destructive wildfire in California history. And that, that fire was really transformative for this region, not just in, like we are kind of a canary in the gold, in the mine, in the mine shaft, in terms of, we have thousands and thousands of climate refugees on our streets, and a housing crisis that is being exacerbated by reactionary forces within the local government. And, we've had 4 more massive wildfires since then, just in this county. And so, this real awareness that things cannot keep going the way that they're going is a thing that's not just shared by us revolutionaries here, but also by the government forces and by people who are starting to understand that climate change and the impacts of climate change are all problems that cannot be solved by conventional means. And so that has actually made some really interesting openings for us to start implementing the kind of programs we need and we will want to see in the future. So I have a lot of slides, but I'm just going to speed right through them. If you can't catch the text on all of them, I will make these slides available so that you can peruse them at your leisure. But I'm going to kind of just speed through this real quick. All right, so first I need to just kind of frame what TEK is, which is traditional ecological knowledge. And don't let the word traditional fool you. Traditional ecological knowledge is kind of now the recognized word for really what is indigenous science. And indigenous science is an adaptive management method that is based on 20, 40 time immemorial presence on the land and a relationship with the land. In that sense, TEK is a place-based way of life. So I can't go from, here I am in Northern California, I can't go to other places in the country and like tell people what to do. Every place is unique and it has a unique relationship with the people of that place. And once you start to understand that, you start to understand that keystone species, so that's the ecological term for plants and animals that play a crucial role in maintaining ecosystems, are also culturally significant species to a people in diets, materials, medicine, etc. So like salmon, right? Salmon, we revere salmon because it is a great food and it's critically endangered. And also it is the keystone species in the ecosystems in this place. There's no concept of private property. Once you understand TEK as a place-based natural resource management, it doesn't make any sense to like stay on your quarter-acre piece of land when you have a responsibility to the entire ecosystem. That's something that people are starting to find out now. You can't just have take care of your own house, because if all the other properties around you are not being managed that way, it won't matter in a fire, right? And so that everyone needs to learn these basic rules of how to live in the place that you live, not just for tribes, but for everyone who touches the land, right? When we think about a decolonized form of occupancy is not as a colonial ownership model, but as a responsibility to the land, we start to, people start to gradually kind of, change their attitudes about what it means to live in a place. And finally, the knowledge and practice of TEK is really important. You have to touch plants to understand what the plants do. You have to touch the land to understand what the land does. The doing causes the knowing. It's a praxis-based worldview. So, are these things eco-socialist? I would say yes, and. Because, David went over the principles of eco-socialism as we've articulated them in the Green Eco-Socialist Network, which in a, is a Marxist understanding of history and how that goes. But when you start to look at things as place-based, you have to look at that nonlinear notion of time. Concepts are rooted in living ecosystems and their cycles. It's also based on a materialism that is that includes non-human agency as well as human agency. The salmon make history, the volcanoes make history, and so does fire. And then also, it is about maintaining relationships. So while eco-socialism is based on modes of production, we can think about a decolonized eco-socialism as also including a mode of relationship to place. Okay. So, and that's how, if you look at the pre-colonial relationships on Turtle Island, they were all based on these things: intertribal trade routes, large-scale land management, as well as seasonal migration. And that informs our efforts today. Of course, so does climate change. Having that knowledge of the impacts of climate change, which in California includes wildfires, temperatures, extreme high temperatures, drought, as well as flooding. Now, what a lot of people don't understand is that, there is actually a multi-billion-dollar industry that is focused on cleaning up and recovering after disasters. Right now, under disaster capitalism, this billion-dollar industry, a multi-billion-dollar industry, is now accruing to the benefit of large private corporations, corporations like Tetra Tech, Phillips Jordan, companies that are literally called ambulance chasers in the disaster industry. They go from place to place. They wreck the land even more than it was by the disaster, and they collect billions and billions of dollars in profit. So, and then of course, the mitigation part of it is that they are hoarding resources. They're trying to even more tighten up the water infrastructure so that farmers and large corporations have access to water. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to make a counter model against, based on TEK, which I like to call disaster indigenism. And that's using those principles of place-based adaptation, large-scale land management, a social economy based on not currency, but seeds and, vital materials for survival, trade, and cooperation. And of course, community land management regimes. All of these are fancy terms for what in the pre-colonial times just was life. It was the way of life. But now in this era, we have to articulate them in things that can actually help us create programs, get them off the ground. So we have to use some of these fancy terms like workforce development, place-based adaptation, community-based natural resource management, in order to make it legible to the government agencies who can legitimize them as well as fund them. Another thing that you understand when you have a TK perspective is that we are already living in a post-apocalyptic landscape. In California, the apocalypse happened 180 years ago through extractive industries such as gold, logging, and water replumbing the ecosystem. So these are all like things that we have to understand in order to articulate a way forward in terms of how we're going to heal the land and the people associated with the land, all people associated with the land, not just Native people. As I like to say, land back means many things, but it also means put the land back the way it's supposed to be, the way it can function for all of us. And there are mechanisms for that. So, the pre-colonial occupancy is now translated into tribal jurisdictions of federally recognized tribes over both public land and private land as well. Sorry, I went the wrong way here. So you can kind of see in these overlays that, tribal jurisdictions still operate over the places that we live. And today, many tribes are, doing lots of things, from water. Here in Chico, our program is based on all of these principles. It's about educating the community in the principles and practices of traditional ecological knowledge. It is also about workforce development, being able to break into that multi-billion-dollar industry of disaster mitigation, disaster recovery and mitigation, and also conservation by training people in those TEK principles to prepare a large-scale and ecologically trained workforce. It's a jobs program. And also, and then finally, leveraging these principles, practices, and the power of tribal governments and tribal sovereignty to secure contracts on public lands and also private lands, as we're starting to get into, to perform that ecosystem restoration, climate adaptation, and mitigation work. So to actually put hands on the land, put native hands on native land, put non-native allies hands on native land, and put the land back, because we're going to need it in the coming disasters. So here's a centerpiece of our program, which is Verbena Fields. It's a 17-acre public park in the urban area of North Chico. And we show up every single Friday without fail. Every single Friday morning, anybody can come and, actually tend the land, to put your hands on plants, to plant things, to harvest things, to collect seeds, and to observe the changes in the land. We've been doing this for about almost 2 years now, and we did it through COVID, because you can do outdoor education, in a COVID safe way, and it has done so much in terms of being able to change the general perception of the community into recognizing what TEK is and why it is a good thing for everybody. A lot of this recognition has led to a lot of breakthroughs, including the very first cultural burn. But our work at Verbena Fields in terms of changing the perception of how landscapes should be has really led to opportunities like this, the very first native-led cultural burn in 150 years in Mechoopda territory. So what we're focusing on in terms of being able to make this jobs program really fly is to look at these as premium skills for restoration workers. There are lots of restoration workers now, including prison crews, right, that are paid $1 an hour. Even out of prison, people are doing backbreaking work in wildlands for less than $15 an hour.
I also can't hear Mel, and she's frozen for me, but I see Michelle still moving. So I'm really sad to say that, Mel, I don't know if you're back with us, but you're muted now, and we lost you. If you could go back just about the last 5 minutes, that would be great. But you're muted at the moment.
Am I back?
You are back.
You were talking about the controlled burns, and then I think that's where it started getting blotchy.
Am I back?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good. Sorry about that. Let's see. Oh, I'm still co-host. Great. Okay. Let me jump back in. What was the last thing y'all heard?
Controlled burn.
The controlled burn. Okay. Cool. So I will go back here and talk about. We've started to forge relationships with other tribes in the area through the Intertribal Stewardship Workforce Initiative. This is a way that tribes and as well as nonprofits and other folks that are willing to help to get this jobs program off the ground can combine our resources to get funding, to get materials, to get other ways to kind of make us ready for work, right? We came together ad hoc after the campfire, were denied, recovery contracts, but now we are preparing to be ready this time around for the next disaster, to be able to capture some of that money that's already being paid out to corporations and put it back in local communities and in tribal communities. Okay. These are one of the things that we've been able to achieve through cooperating with the tribal government as well as local. So things like restoration. There's a big effort. There was a multi-million-dollar effort to restore salmon habitats in this area, none of which were including tribal people and tribal governments until we kind of shoved our way in, right? And when we did, and this was our first kind of pilot project, which was East Sand Slough. It's a mile of riparian habitat along the Sacramento River. They were out of budget. They didn't have a lot of money left, and we're like, we'll do it. We just want the opportunity to try. And so we put together a program, we put together a project based on, that tribal sovereignty, based on the way that Native people would do it. And the results have been outstanding. This is us when we started the project in February 2022. Remember, this is an extreme drought year for California. And this is what it looks like just 4 months later. So, this project has really become really high profile because we have proven the worth and the effectiveness and the efficiency and the fiscal efficiency too of a tribal program that is able to put hands on the land in a way that will fulfill the outcomes that everybody wants. We're starting now to go into looking at the private lands that are, so there's a couple of programs. So there's one that I'm not going to talk so much about because I'm not really authorized to, which is the tribal, through the tribal government to have contracts for public lands. And what I am authorized to talk about is looking at the restoration of private lands in private conservancy. So I was just hired on as the conservation director of California Open Lands, which is a private conservancy in Northern California. And me and the executive director, who is also a proponent of TEK, we were able to get the mission statement and bylaws of this private conservancy changed so that TEK tribal access to land for food, medicine, and other things, and also that sovereignty piece is built in now to the structure of this organization. So we're trying to transform the practices of private conservancy, which was based on that private property, enclosure, fortress conservation, to making it open to tribal stewardship and collaboration, knowing these principles of community-based land management. We're also exploring master stewardship agreements with the tribes that are the peoples of the places where we hold property. And going forward, we want to work with tribes in the strategic acquisition of conservation lands. So if they can't get land back through the normal process, we can say, okay, where do you need? What places do you need to reestablish a relationship with? We'll get it for you, right? And we can also justify that by looking at critical watersheds, doing all of these things, as well as historical and cultural sites. So that's kind of that using the weird private property rules of capitalism to decommodify property and make it available and giving land back to tribes in a roundabout kind of way. And here's like kind of what we do. This is part of my so the first one is Table Mountain, which is like a really popular wildflower reserve that was a shared area for Native women to gather. And so we're acquiring this property in order to restore that site to its original pre-colonial function as a cultural reserve for Native women. And then we're looking also out at the rest of the landscape to see what can we do. Last thing I'm going to talk about is the Tribal Seed Bank program. And this is what's really interesting is that, when we think about capitalism, right, we're thinking about money, we're thinking about currency. But if you look at an indigenous way of looking at social economies, we look at seeds as our capital, right? Seeds, there's a massive need for seeds. The Dixie Fire, which is the map that you see there, burned 1 million acres, right, in Mountain Maidu and Washoe territory. And there's a huge need to put native, because this is a reset, because of this ecological reset, we need to do it right to put native ecosystems back. And you need native seeds for that by any means necessary, right? Seeds also helps us in our workforce development program because, these projects are kind of a pay to play. You have to bring in a match, whether it's cash or in kind. Seeds are our in-kind contribution to be able to get our workforce those contracts, to get those jobs, into the local communities. We're also looking at community scale planning and defense of communities in the WUI, the wildland urban interface. But unlike money capital, right, which can get siphoned off into profits elsewhere, seeds, of course, produce year after year and they expand as well. Just like money, but they have to be reinvested into maintaining and growing those land stewardship projects and not be converted into profit. That's actually also protected in a very strange way through the tribal sovereignty over native seeds. So weirdly enough, we're using that kind of Monsanto patent thing, but also saying that because these are cultural resources of tribes, tribes have the final say as to who is able to profit off of seeds in their territory. So we're hoping to like replace the extractive commercial nursery paradigm with the paradigm of native seeds held by tribes, but also brought out to the land by a workforce. And we have this residential program too, where we can do community scale planning. So we can take a neighborhood, kind of take out the property lines, think about what the landscape needs, put the property lines back in, and give people a map to see, look, you are in this place that should be a meadow. You have meadow seeds, right? And that way your house can be part of this big fire break that will protect your entire community. And we're working with some of our volunteers to form a worker cooperative that can be a landscaping cooperative that can go out and actually do that in a community setting. So that's a real exciting thing. We're starting to develop all of those things. And but in some, these are the types of things that we're trying to do, is put the land back and create jobs and have a bright future for rural communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mel. That was rich, it was deep, and I'm sure we're going to have a lot of great conversation and questions coming out of it. Before we do, though, folks, we're going to hear from Michelle Eddleman McCormick. Michelle Eddleman McCormick is with both Cooperation Vermont as well as the Marshfield Village Store. So I'm going to just turn the microphone directly over to Michelle. So Michelle, why don't you do the same thing? Just sort of introduce yourself as well as the work that you are doing in Cooperation Vermont through an eco-socialism lens. And the constant COVID refrain, you're muted.
I'm muted. So again, Michelle Eddleman McCormick, she, her pronouns, and coming to you from ancestral Abenaki territory in Marshfield, Vermont. And as David was mentioning, I wear many hats, Cooperation Vermont being one of them. The general manager at the Marshfield Village Store, which is kind of the flagship project for Cooperation Vermont. And I'm also the coordinator for a project here called Regeneration Corps that is working in schools for course credit to implement regenerative agriculture programs and teaching and actually adapting some climate change resiliency strategies on a local level in each of these towns or villages. And yeah, so that keeps me pretty busy between that and having 2 kids and a partridge in a pear tree. So, people are starting to hear, I think, about Cooperation Vermont in some circles. And I know there's a lot of questions like, what are they? Who are they? What's going on? And those are all very valid questions. And I would like to start off by saying that I do not have slides. Mel brought all the slides for all of us today. What is it you always say, David? What is it?
Mel knows this. My nickname for Mel is Mel, quote, I have a slide for that, Figueroa, because it's literally hundreds of presentations with Mel, and she either already has a kick-ass slide deck, or as I'm talking, she'll say, oh, wait, I have a slide for that, and literally we'll bring it up like while I'm just talking. So Mel brings it hard and makes the rest of us look puny in comparison visually.
Allbad.com over here by comparison, but there will be no slides. So the short of it is that Cooperation Vermont is a very, very new effort that is comprised at the moment with our core, collective of me, Kali Akuno from Cooperation Jackson, Nadahe Stoddard from Building Fearless Futures here in Vermont, that does, anti-racism work, working specifically in schools, but with some adults, as well. And particularly working with folks, in the schools that have exhibited problematic behavior or just outright racist behavior, and like actively working with them to pull them, in and away from the culture that is really dragging folks further and further towards fascism right now. So that's Nadahe Stoddard, and then Russell Maroon Schultz III, who also organizes with Building Fearless Futures, that spends, he's all over, but between Philly and Vermont, he's in between the two. And then Avani Pasapati, who works here at the Marshfield Village store, and also at Black Dirt Farms, which is an amazing ally farm here in Vermont. So the idea behind Cooperation Vermont is, while it's, decades behind in reality and what, could have or should have needed to be done, it's an effort to start preparation for folks that we just know are going to be climate migrants coming from the South, and political increasingly as well. And both of us, have firsthand experiences in both of us being, those of us from the South, me and Kali Akuno, in areas that are just, going to be increasingly uninhabitable. And, as these fascist regimes continue to strengthen, which I don't think that there's anything, that's going to be putting them in backwards motion anytime soon, largely indefensible. And so, it's been identified not just by us, by lots of people, that most likely Vermont is going to be one of the more habitable and possibly thriving places as the effects of climate change continue to march on. The water here is very clean. The land is farmable. It's in some ways quasi-defensible, has a very long history and culture of folks working in ways that, while there were different, theories and language behind it, what now is like understood as to be more of a regenerative agriculture, approach here, so that the soil is still good, and there's a sense of village and town and community organizing here that happens kind of at all, levels, whether it's seed saving programs, community gardens, people are working on building food forests, they have CSAs, there's a lot here in Vermont that has been, going on for decades, that, there's so many conversations that we don't have to have here, so that we can, have these new other conversations, if that makes sense. And so it's really, it's largely an effort at this point to start paving the way for folks who will be coming, that we think is, an inevitability. And how do we do that in a way that establishes this, how do we do it in a way that we're able to, create the society that we are looking for when things start to collapse, around us, and we have this space that's already, ripe for this transformative, economics and transformative, food systems, and transformative, social organizing, and the society that we're all looking to have. Like, is this possibly a place where we could stake that out as an option? right? Could it be a thing? Could, you know, this area that we're in right here be an autonomous zone? And we think that it, you know, it could be. There's a lot of amazing people that have been here for a very long time, you know, doing work for decades, and the land is, you know, very well preserved and in many respects. I mean, every place has its challenges, and this place will be no different in the challenges to come. But, you know, one thing that is abundantly clear for anybody who's been here, you'll know what I mean, that Vermont, despite, you know, it's largely more center to left leaning thing. I mean, it's the home of Bernie Sanders, right? So, you know, it's a softer crowd here in many respects, but it is very, very white here, like 95+%, like the entire state. And it's also very rural. There's only roughly 600,000 people in the entire state. And so that, you know, is definitely poses its own set of challenges. And so with that, yeah, I was just looking at the comment that popped up. It's very, very white here. And, you know, so what does that look like as well with the work that we have in front of us, in that, you know, while Vermont doesn't have a reputation of being full of, you know, right-wingers, there are pockets, don't get me wrong, you know, they're everywhere. You know, well-meaning white liberals can be equally problematic, and it's one thing to have a Black Lives Matter flag in your lawn today, and then when there are actual Black people from the South moving up here, those same folks suddenly being the folks that call the cops on their neighbors because parties are too loud, the music is too loud, or all of those things, right? Just as, like, for example. And so what is the work that, you know, we need to do here as well, that folks coming up will be able to be at home in a place like Vermont? So there's, you know, and I know this all sounds like, you know, kind of a little bit all over the place, and it is coming down to a few basic things that we are starting to work on. And as we're moving through this, and as we are really starting to work and connect, you know, with the folks that are here in Vermont, all, you know, who have been the various organizations at each of the, you know, the towns, the villages, or within a county, working on various projects that we can be coordinating and collaborating with. For now, like our flagship project was the purchase of the Marshfield Village store, which is in a very small town in, like, it's the store and a gas station, then our community school house commons, which isn't a school anymore. It's where the library and the town clerk are, in the village, you know, clerk's office are at, in the playground. So, I mean, that's the entire kind of community space for this town, but it's right along the US 2 corridor between, you know, Danville and Montpelier, and then if you go further from there, you're in Burlington. So it's kind of also strategically located, but it is this general store in the middle of, you know, Marshfield, that Corporation Jackson currently owns the building, while Cooperation Vermont is being established. Like, we just got our 501c3 recognition like a month ago. And so that's, you know, currently being stewarded by Cooperation Jackson. And the business has been converted to a worker-owned cooperative. And through that, it has been a place where from here, we are able to really get to know and to organize with and to meet and to build community with, and all of these things, the folks in our immediate environs. And that has been absolutely crucial as an opportunity to really get to know, and for folks to get to know us as individuals rather than a set of politics. Because I really genuinely feel that it's going to be the strength of the personal, relationships that we have with folks, and the connections. My friend and colleague from Regeneration Corps, Kat Buxton, calls it the social mycelium, right? I think that is ultimately what's going to be the glue that is able to hold together our communities into the future. And so from the store, now starting to work on what, amongst us, we would call it more of a food sovereignty project, but connecting with all the local, farmers and producers and the gardeners, just folks who are either professionally, casually, or just super lightly, whatever, producing food right in our immediate environs. Like, who has the cows, who has the chickens, who has, hey, I've got blueberries, right? Everybody around here, for the most part, is growing or doing something. And how do we really start to connect those folks more formally into a food system, and being able to use the store as the center focus for that, and setting those things up to, could we have a food system that is somewhat, circular within just, our, maybe not just Marshfield, but like our 2 towns over? Could we be self-sufficient? I think we could, actually. And so that's, part of the process there in moving forward. And so we're also working, starting to, we've done it for 2 summers now, just by, with our, folks coming up from the South with all of our kids, and having, nature education programs for the kids, so that, and families, and, all of us really, but really the focus the last 2 sessions has been, with the youth, helping them to know the land and to learn from the folks that have been stewarding the land, thus far, so that they can help to develop like a sense of belonging here as well. And starting, to the process for which kids coming in will at least, be able to have some of the same kinds of information that they will need in order to be able to be good stewards of the land moving forward. So yeah, really getting to know this specific land here. So, there are still, and, I think are continuing discussions about how best to go about it, and, partnerships that need to take place, because none of this stuff exists in a silo for sure. But, housing development is a pretty serious need already here in the state. But doing it in a way that, is going to, not be extractive labor-wise, not be extractive from the land, and definitely, being cognizant of the need to maintain our watershed, but folks, having habitable and dignified housing going forward, I think, is a serious need that we have to start. We should have been, but here we are planning for right now. And yeah, so that's, kind of where we're at in a wee bit of a nutshell. It's a lot going on all at once. We need more folks, like we always do. We just got our first exchange, persons from Cooperation Jackson, who has come up here to help us ground some of our other spaces during the winter, and help, he calls himself a forerunner. His name is Andrew Campbell, in case anybody knows him from Cooperation Jackson. So yeah, there's a lot going on. And I apologize if I seem really scattered. I've got a pretty serious health issue happening at this exact moment. And both of my sons are home for the first time together at the same time in 6 months. So it's a super big deal. But yeah. David, have I missed anything? Mel?
It was great. And I'm sorry, I did not know that you were dealing with the health issue. Thank you.
No, it's not one thing, it's another.
And going forward. So, folks, I am going to now share with folks. Kamal Franklin is not going to be able to join us, I'm sad to say, but he did ask me first, he sends his apologies. He is willing to come back on, so we'll do another really deep dive, but he encouraged me to do just an overview of the org. And so I am going to do that. Slightly sheepishly as a white person, because Community Movement Builders is an explicitly Pan-African revolutionary nationalist, Black nationalist organization. But they are comrades, and just to name it, both Mel and Michelle, myself, Kamal, Kali, Netahe, Russell, a lot of the folks that you've heard us talk about are all part of a grouping called the People's Network for Land and Liberation, where we are all explicitly revolutionaries and finding ways to work together. So with that, this white person is actually going to do a short overview on the Community Movement Builders, but also by sharing with you that we are definitely going to bring Kamal or somebody else back from Community Movement Builders to speak for themselves. So you should now be seeing my screen. I'm going to close some of these out so you can see it more easily. So this is when you go to communitymovementbuilders.org, I'll drop that into the chat just so that you have it. Let me find it one moment, or I'll just ask somebody else to drop communitymovementbuilders.org into the chat. Probably the most important thing from my perspective is to note from the very beginning, if you'll click on their mission and values, they're member-based, they're a collective of Black people. They explicitly talk about sustainability, self-determination through cooperative economic advancement. Again, I'm going very quickly. Self-determination, sustainability, leadership specifically coming out of the community, Black love, solidarity, humanity. And then they have a 10-point program. I also want to really underscore liberated zones, right? Like they have real clarity on what they are about. And that is a theory of liberated zones where the masses of people who live in and around a specific area are ultimately in near or either complete or near complete control over both the political and socioeconomic destiny in which they're living. They have a series of specific programs: anti-gentrification, ending police violence, food sustainability, community liberation, Pan-African solidarity, and learning from the Black Panther Party. I'm going to stop now simply because I have gotten permission from Kamal to share, again, his apologies for not being able to join us. He did encourage me to do just a big overview, but he did say that he or somebody from Community Movement Builders would come on for a Green Eco-Socialist Network webinar and do a deeper dive. So what I'm going to do is actually stop now, and I'm going to ask folks, if folks are interested in either making a comment or ask a question, if you can, raise your hand. Mel, Michelle, and I will all be sort of watching this. We'll unmute you so that we can get into a little bit of a conversation. So again, feel free to make a comment about either of the two models that you heard, or you can ask a question. In the meantime, I will also really point out how profoundly different both of these look like, sort of in their specifics because of what they're focusing on, but also how profoundly similar they are coming out of the values. One of the things that I'll just point out, boy, how clear they both were about land and food production and housing were to these various projects. So I'm wondering, Mel, if you've got anything that you want to react to what you heard from Michelle while we wait to see if there are folks who are interested in joining. So Mel, bring you back into the conversation.
Yes. I just want to say I just had the pleasure of visiting Cooperation Vermont and the folks last week, and I think it's beautiful what they're doing. I also just wanted to introduce Allie Metters-Knight. She is the main mastermind behind our program here. She is a tribal TEK practitioner for the Mechoopda tribe, and just wanted to introduce y'all to the revolutionary mind behind all of this. So,
well, that's quite an introduction. Yeah, my name is Allie. Thank you. She asked me to come on just as a Q&A for anything. I'm just out working with Willow, so I'm kind of looking rough right now. But
touching the plants right now.
Touching it. But just an overview. After 20 years of working as a traditional practitioner, there's nation building strategies involved with steward land that are traditional. And so I've been able to basically use this, which has been difficult because Mel knows along the way, every time I turn around, someone's like, why don't you do a 501c3? How come you don't have a nonprofit? Why are you keep putting this into the tribe, under the tribe? I was like, well, this is nation building. And some of these strategies are really go far, deep, and wide for stewardship, including patenting through tribes, species, traditional native species within their territory to protect them, and to, basically pirate some of these capitalized situations and turn them into unique opportunities for local tribes and local communities to build, a local economy together.
So thank you, Allie. It's always a pleasure to see you and have you participating, and not surprised at all that you were out tending Willow. So folks, I do want to lift up that one of the participants used the chat function to ask a question that I'm going to ask both Cooperation Vermont and TEK Chico to react to, and that is some resources or details on how eco-socialism in a new world might function.
Well, I think that there's always this presumption that indigenous tribes come from a very primitive state of mind, and that maybe a European in 1850 brain was far more developed than, say, a Maidu brain was developed in 1850. But that is a false assumption. So if you want to really look, it was only 180 years ago here that actual eco-socialism took place within tribes. So there is an actual network right there for you to see how it works with trading routes, with food they used, how they used it, what they procured, what they traded, what they capitalized on, and
how they dealt with climate change.
And they even used shells and other things as actual, which we'd say what we call currency. And those types of situations, even down deep to that, just as it was undone by colonialism, you can see how they undone. What did they undo? So there you go.
Michelle, would you like to share some thoughts? And I also encourage you to talk about what I've heard y'all at Cooperation Vermont talk about in terms of both political education and productive capacity and housing, and like how you're thinking about that.
Yeah, so I mean, there's definitely, the political education piece of it, and and working very much on a community based level to do some of that community, or to do some of that political education in a way that's reaching across what I would say are in our political spectrum, people who may be further to the right you know, like my neighbor right next to the store has a big giant flag that says, you know, fuck Biden on it, right? And he comes in the store all the time with his dog, and we love having conversations. First conversation, I was like, yeah, fuck Biden. Let's talk about that, but here's why, you know? And starting to create some, you know, more of a humanistic approach to these conversations, where we can start to build some common ground around things around here. In particular, like people are very, very connected to agriculture and to, you know, food production and understanding, you know, supply chain breakdowns and, you know, not like seeing for themselves how difficult it is to get a gallon of milk into a rural village store in the middle of Vermont that's surrounded by dairy cows. Like, why is that? What is happening? And so really having those conversations with folks on, you know, a community, you know, based level, and talking about how we need to, as a community, be able to come together to build solutions for ourselves, like of our own, that is irrespective of these, you know, larger market forces that kind of everybody is across the board very anti, which is a great starting place, I think. So, you know, definitely some of the political education pieces of it, and where we can, you know, going deeper and being really explicit about, you know, our eco-socialist perspectives, and, you know, why that makes sense, and, you know, what the economy of the, you know, the future is that we want to see, and how we want to, you know, be caring for and stewarding the land and relating to the land, and you know, how we need to be able to you know, have our own secure way of providing for folks, you know, when it comes to food and housing, because everything is just so fragile, and it's just everywhere, and people are really, I mean, it has been for a very long time, but I think it's increasingly becoming just fragile for folks. And trying, you know, just being able to come together to work collectively to create some very localized solutions. You know, I don't know if anybody caught the piece that Kali wrote some months ago, but sometime in the last year, where he was talking about, you know, like the fascists are here, they're strengthening, shit is getting real, like real, and we need to start being dead ass serious about preparing. And he's talking about a 10-mile radius. And so for some of us that might, you know, look different depending on where specifically we're located. Maybe it's a 10-block radius, and maybe in my case it's like a 20-mile radius or a 30-mile radius because of how rural we are. But the idea is like within a, you know, a close in geographic area, start to really get down to the roots, you know, in our community, organizing and, you know, creating solidarity networks, you know, creating the mechanisms for mutual aid to be happening, and for emergency preparedness and emergency response, because I think that that's going to be, you know, an increasingly serious thing. A lot of you probably, you know, don't know me, but where I know Kali from is from organizing in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, and my project area was the Lower Ninth Ward, and that's, you know, where we met and have known each other since, and are acutely familiar of, you know, and I mean, looking at Paradise, right? Like what happens when these catastrophes, you know, happen, and it becomes absolutely utterly apparent that there's no real help coming, right? Like it's just not coming, and that we have to be able to care for ourselves and each other in a way that, interestingly, oddly, sadly, good news, bad news, not really sure what it is, but that dynamic actually, I think, favors the argument that we've been making all along, right? So the harder things get, the easier it is, I think, for folks who've been very comfortable or comfortable enough to not have to look at how brutal, the systemically brutal for so many other people, capitalism has been with our, extractive methods, modes of production, and all of these things. I think that the harder shit gets, the easier it's just going to be for folks to see what we've been saying, if that makes sense.
Well, thank you both for the responses. I'm going to bring Stacy Sutton into the conversation now. Stacy, I'm really honored to have you here. For folks who don't know, Stacy is deep into both study and practice of these from an academic perspective, but also a practitioner. So Stacy, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you, and really thank you both, all of you. This was wonderful. It's unfortunately that Kamal isn't here, but I learned a lot, and I have two questions that I've been grappling with both throughout as well as throughout Michelle's conversation. So, but I'll pose I think the somewhat easier question first, and that's for Mel. I was intrigued by the way in which the project is almost co-opting the language of workforce development, economic development, the very conventional nomenclature to be able to, which is legible to, the federal government. Thus, you're able to get access to resources. It makes a lot of sense. It's a tactic that I think a lot of orgs perhaps could adopt. But then I guess the question then becomes one of the formation, the organization or formation and its relationship to the state, right? It's one thing to say, well, we'll just use it. We need to get resources that conventional firms, private sector firms and other capitalists get. Absolutely. But then there's this bond. It's not like they just give resources and then allow for autonomy. So there's a tension there. So perhaps you can speak to that. So that's one question, full stop. The other question is for Michelle. And, I just want to thank you, Michelle, for being, very transparent. And I appreciate your candor. Because when Kali mentioned that they were going to Vermont, I was like, what? How is that going to work? Like, I couldn't really get my head around it. And so you said something early on, which I think you actually answered the question as you continue to talk. Because early on, you talked about the culture of Vermont, right? That a lot of us know, at least from afar, and the culture of cooperation. So that means there's some conversations you don't have to have. You don't have to kind of start with co-op 101, right? Because that's just inherent in the way people are doing what they need to do on a daily, as well as the food sovereignty and so forth. But then, when I start thinking about Black folks coming to Vermont, I think the concern I have is really the conversations that need to happen around that, right? And how that will happen, Black, Brown, Indigenous, because everything you just said, I agree with, but I think the fragility, how that kind of manifests, and the fear and how that manifests, it won't just be around, the fear of, the music is too loud, or just invoking some punitive strategies or calling in the state because the music's too loud. It will be about Blackness. I mean, that's correlated with Blackness in terms of people's perceptions, but just having bodies there, I can imagine that creating a lot of fear. When they're a couple, it's not as bad, but when they're larger groups. So, what I really appreciate is the way in which you're doing, it's kind of the slow work that you're doing in terms of building relationship and really meeting people where they are. You align around food and land. So I guess it's more of this was a comment, I'm sorry, but the question is really how you're going to sort that out, right? Like, how do you both do the work that you're doing and sort out structural racism. That's how do you sort that out in Vermont? I'll just end there.
Two powerful and pointed questions, just to remind folks to TEK Chico, what's it like beginning to relate to the state from the explicit political orientation that you've addressed? And then back to you, Michelle, the question, what does it look like on the ground to actually be trying to prepare white Vermont for Black and brown bodies to actually be neighbors? Chico, TEK?
Yeah, so I think the best thing I can break it down is I'm getting into land stewardship, right? And so there is in the state of California forests. There are federal forests, there are state forests, okay? Altogether, there's 33 million acres of forests. 19 million acres is federal forest, backed up by Secretary of Interior, all run by Washington, D.C., by that Congress, all right? State has the rest, right? That's Newsom and they have the state capital. Well, right now, being a tribal member, I am Mechoopda. It's not a race. I'm politically affiliated. It's my nationality. I'm a citizen of my Mechoopda Indian tribe, which is a sovereign nation within the domestic boundaries of the United States. I have the tribe, all federally recognized tribe, have a government-to-government relationship with Congress. States have a government-to-government relationship with Congress. So they are not our brethren as much as they might be our little brother compared to our relationship with the federal Congress, the federal relation. So we are actually a nationality. From the very beginning of the United States, without a tribes were already writing treaties with France and all kinds of European tribes. It was when the United States, or the beginning colonies, got a treaty from the tribes that they then were once recognized as an entity. So nothingness came from recognizing its nothingness, as the brilliant beginning is always like that. So there is the identity is a political affiliation. So it changes your relationship with your state capital as you work, because I walk in and say, I talk to feds first, and I'll talk to y'all later. I'll work with federal policy because federal policy will tell you, state of California, what to do. And so I don't even, like, states are cool and stuff. Like, I'll have dinner with them. They're cute for whatever. And even local municipals, they're cute. But, supervisors and all that. But really, when you have tribal land, federal land within your jurisdiction, you'll have a lot more bigger stick to swing than people realize. And that's how you get a lot of policies run through, because if you can get the tribe to put land into federal trust, which my tribe does, and I'm a tribal member, I have a sweet spot situation as who I am, and say, look, we can do our own housing, we can do our own grid, we can do anything because we're in the nation of Mechoopda. State of California can kiss. You can't jurisdict on sovereignty. You can't step on our sovereignty. They just lost a lawsuit to Chicken Ranch in the Ninth Circuit saying, our casinos, we don't have to pay California all these taxes and comply with you just because you happen to touch the border of our tribe, that we have to owe you. What else do we owe you, state of California? More scalps, more ancestors, more dead babies? What? So we don't owe California anything. So they have to come correct with us, but you have to be positioned politically, which I'm building up through workforce development. Because they don't got a trick up their sleeve. I got tricks.
And so it's that alliance. And so it's an alliance with the non-native communities, with the native communities, that can both help to bolster that tribal sovereignty and also start to have a different paradigm of stateness, actually.
Which brings you to understand blood quantum. When someone says, how much Indian are you? You're basically asking me my blood level is how much political affiliation I have, which is pretty sick if you ask somebody that, like, how much, it's a dream of Hitler to have a nation that's a pure blood nation. And so that's not something I think tribes really want to strive to be. But we're placed just socially as a race. But honestly, we're politically affiliated as a nation. And I think that that in the 70s, if we could have politically affiliated and nationalized some of these movements back then, like we did tribes with it through AIM, it would have been different. But it was only tribes that got that congressional tip nod. Yeah, we do business with you. And so that's how we're in the seat today, 2022.
Yeah, thank you. And I think as soon as you reminded me who I was speaking with, I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. It's just, and then it becomes a question of how your strategy, and it's not a question, but just how your strategy is applicable to folks that don't have sovereignty, spaces that don't have that sovereignty. But thank you for checking my, my ignorance. I just forgot. My bad.
We're going to go to Michelle to react and respond to Stacey's question to her, and then Nasim Nuri will be next.
So yeah, that is a super super big question, right? Because how do we dismantle systemic racism in a place that is 95% white, and with the impetus being that folks are going to need a place to go when climates are changing and politics are shifting and becoming more aggressive, and then even it's just in my specific unique one person case, I was living in Southwest Florida, where the red tides and the blue-green algae were just creating horrible air quality conditions, and my kids couldn't go, to the beach. I was getting sick from being outside for any period of time. It causes respiratory problems, and then it's 2020, and during the Floyd, rebellion, I've got Proud Boys and 3%ers following me around with my kids in the car and taking pictures and making very blatant threats. And this is a county of, plus or minus, depending on what time of year it is, 300,000 to 400,000 people. And there was one comrade, one out of 300 to 400,000 people. And so it's just this isn't defensible. Climate change is just shit. I mean, just because my family has been here for a few generations doesn't mean there's anything going to be salvageable about any of this. And so I ended up bringing both of my children up to Vermont, and both of my sons are Black. And my oldest son was supposed to be starting high school this past year, and I made the decision to put him in school with his dad in Barbados, because I just I didn't know enough and couldn't really say how seriously that would be of an experience for him, one, dropping into rural Vermont in the winters, and also an almost entirely, not entirely, but almost entirely white school for his first year of high school. I mean, that seems like a big ask, right? And so I don't pretend, to have all of the answers. I think if we had the answers, we'd have been done that shit, right? And so I think it's a good faith, effort in experimenting with really trying to build community relations, and trying to do the work on a person to person and group to group level. I mean, I wish Nadahe was here, because this is really what he does, and does so well as a Vermonter, and as somebody who grew up in the movement, as a red diaper baby, but it has just this real connection with the folks that are here. Sorry, something flashed up on my screen and I got distracted. Sorry, also doing a little bit of pain management.
Michelle,
what was I going to say? Oh, no, it's okay. I do have one more point. In that there another really big demographic here in Vermont is poor, broke down ass white folks, generationally, and it's just gotten worse and worse for them generationally as well, where they've lost the lands they'd had, for years, because they can't keep up with the taxes, and so it gets parceled off, and then, farmers who have had to fold, and sell the farms, who are now living in rental units in villages, and like it's a whole dynamic here. And I absolutely do not want to pretend to be reductionist. And when I talk about really trying to connect with people on a working class, basis, and building working class solidarity. So not, to be reductionist, but I think that is a really important thing here, right? Is to be able to connect with folks that, understand that there's a boot on their fucking neck, right? But it's not my boot. It's not Andrew's boot, right? Let's talk about whose boot this is and start to build more and more solidarity with these poor, broke down white folks and organize them as well. If that makes sense.
Thank you so much. I'm going to now bring Nasim Nouri into the conversation. Nasim, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's so inspiring to hear not just about what's happening on the ground and what solutions there are to offer, but how many people you are all inspiring and how many people are getting involved. These practical solutions, like real tactical solutions to what we each wake up thinking is unsurmountable problems, are inspiring. So thank you for that. And Stacy, you brought this really important point, which made me think about a huge part of the goal of organizing in modules like Cooperation Jackson is really focused around the class struggle. So being able to amplify and highlight that the poor white folks in Vermont are exactly in the same, are under the same boot, as Michelle points out, is a huge success. So for me, the value of that is shifting that and creating this common bridge, which I think ancestral and Aboriginal and Native culture automatically does. But we as colonizers have lost that. So we get separated and divided. And the success of Cooperation Vermont, the success of even isolated, very white or very Asian or very culturally undiversified population still is huge to amplify this class struggle that we all have. I think that's the most important bridge we can create, not necessarily to say that we need to bring in different populations into a community to integrate, but our integration is at a much higher level, which is class struggle, and why modeling Cooperation Jackson is powerful to a very white, less diverse community too. So I really appreciated Stacy's point and both Michelle's and other folks who spoke to that.
So I'm going to invite either Mel or Michelle to react or respond, and then ask you both also to just take a look at the chat as you think about what your final thoughts or comments are going to be. But first, anything, Nasim brought class struggle forefront, and I really think it's important that we react to that notion.
Absolutely. I can start off. So our focus on workforce development has really been a good way to talk about class, to talk about, especially in rural communities. 14,000 jobs have been lost in our county since the Camp Fire because of the fires. The logging industry is in a shambles. Where we are is a very economically depressed area. And so, and these programs too, it's like, these programs aren't we do have to educate the entire community, and we have a lot of, allies, from various classes. But in terms of who gets a job and what our jobs programs are, 90% of our crew comes right out of prison. A lot of the folks that were being paid $1 a day to fight fires are now, getting paid $33 an hour to restore, these places. And so, you know, and we have Black, Brown, Latinx, like, you know, folk on our team. And so, you know, it's an interesting, I think the other thing too is just the realities of climate disaster in our area. You know, one of these things, I mean, it's so weird that, like, you know, I'm in this private conservancy where the biggest real estate developer in Chico is on the board, but he is also genuinely terrified of climate change because he's seen it. We've all seen it. And so that gives us an in to be able to, you know, to say, look, you know, the folks who are the most oppressed have the answers. And, you know, what I call it, I don't, you know, necessarily call it class, or what do I call it? I don't call it like environmental justice. I call it, do you want to burn to death or not? Politics. And I think that's helped us bridge a lot of divides. And put the working class in the lead as well.
Michelle, I know you've got a lot going on and you're not feeling well, but I'm wondering if you wanted to react to that comment from Nasim. And at least for me, Michelle is frozen. So I'm going to jump in very quickly as the moderator, really to remind folks who are on this call that we as eco-socialists really have got to have clarity on what we mean by class struggle, because it's not merely, like, first of all, we're taught not to talk about class in this country, right? That's number one. Number two, even when it does come up, we're trained to be talking about just socioeconomic levels. But what we're saying as eco-socialists is we're going to say clearly and unequivocally that we understand class struggle as who owns the means of production and who has decision-making authority to it. So in the classic Marxist understanding of class struggle, it is the function of when the owning class simply pays the working class or the non-owning class to make the things that they then sell, and the profit belongs to the owning class. So the working class or the non-owning class have no say in their pay except for what they're organized enough to extract as a concession, but they have no say in the ownership, they have no say. And for us, that is at the core what we mean by class struggle, and we really have got to stop apologizing for that and remember that in the 70s, or like the last time there was really, in my opinion, really strong, vibrant social movements, it was in part because there was the clarity and the willingness to talk about class struggle in movements instead of being afraid to do it. So I just wanted to bring that into the conversation. And Michelle, I think you're back with us now.
Yes, I'm back. And yes, everything you just said, David. And when I was bringing up, you know, the importance of class struggle and building solidarity, it was in a conversation or somewhat of a response to, you know, Stacy's question. And I do just want to be sure that I'm clear that I'm not being Pollyanna in believing that just addressing the class struggle and building working class solidarity is going to, in and of it by itself, while it is an absolutely fundamental and critical piece, like baseline has to happen to address just even here, you know, in Vermont, issues of systemic racism. It's not going to be the only thing. Does that make sense?
So thank you, Nasim, and thank you to everybody who joined the call. I am going to invite final thoughts from both Mel and then Michelle, and then I'll end with a couple of invitations. Mel?
Sure. I don't know what else to say other than to reiterate, putting the land back. You know, I think again, thinking about what the land needs, thinking about who the land needs, and, you know, actually like rebuilding that relationship that capitalism has separated from us with the means of our survival and subsistence. You know, like some folks have had that separation longer than others. And so, you know, we need to be learning from each other in terms of how we can fundamentally rebuild those relationships to place that we're talking about. You know, that's something I think is an addition to, it's a friendly amendment, shall we say, to the Marxist notions of class struggle that we're all used to. And, you know, if we think about primitive accumulation not only as the enclosure of property, but the separation of the relationship to people and place, that gives us a framework to work together to recognize, you know, I mean, tribes kind of own the knowledge of the means of survival, right? Which is a huge wedge and a really, you know, and something that can be very generative. So, yeah, that's all I got.
Michelle, any final thoughts?
Yeah, my final thought is that I think it would be really awesome. I don't know if it would work or make sense or whatever, but maybe when you bring Kamau back, maybe a good look would be to have Nadahe and Russ come on.
I think that's a fantastic solution, because remember, folks, at the Green Eco-Socialist Network, we are committed to political education, but not as, it's not like the old political education, at least that I was in, where you do deep dives on the text and stay sort of academic and merely theoretical. I want to say that, like, I study movement history and I study theory, not because I want to become a really good movement Trivial Pursuit player. I study theory and I study movement history because I want to fucking win. I want to win and live in a completely new world. I return to the world of liberation and interconnectedness. This is our birthright. We're supposed to be fucking living like this. This system has stripped us from our humanity. It's stripped us from our interconnection. It's taken us off the land. It's dispersed us. Like, I believe if we study theory, if we study history, it actually helps us to become more effective revolutionaries. Because I'll say this, theory without action or without a practice is mere contemplation. But practice without theory is just doing stuff, right? And so maybe you'll get lucky if you're just doing stuff and have some liberated moment, but it will be by accident. The only way, like, we really do believe that revolutionaries make revolution, right? But you don't make revolution like at any time, but we're in a revolutionary moment, which means if we make it happen, we will have revolution. So I'm going to end with a specific invitation. I've dropped it into the chat, but I want to make a specific appeal to all of you who have stayed on. So thank you for doing so. But the Green Eco-Socialist Network is a dues-paying organization. The dues are very cheap and they can also be waived. But we do offer things to members that are not offered to non-members. This was open to anyone. But I know this, ain't nobody gonna liberate ourselves but ourselves. We believe that a dues-paying membership is the way that we can build both political and financial independence to be able to create the world that we so desperately need and so richly deserve. Peace.